The air in Vivant, the restaurant where Kaya worked, was always thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. Tonight, it was also thick with tension. It emanated from the corner booth, a bubble of unnerving silence in the otherwise lively room. Mr. Tanaka's table. Kaya knew his name because the manager, sweating through his starched shirt, had hissed it at the staff during their pre-shift briefing. He gets whatever he wants. No questions. No mistakes. Kaya had been refilling water glasses, her movements small and efficient, trying to remain invisible. The men at the table were all dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits, their quiet conversation a low rumble that felt more dangerous than a shout. One of them, a man with a cruel twist to his mouth, laughed a little too loudly at something. A bad investment, Tanaka-sama. We should have put the money into something more predictable. The man at the head of the table, Kenji Tanaka, didn't look at him. His gaze was calm, fixed on the swirl of amber liquid in his glass. He had an unnerving stillness, a predatory patience that made the air around him feel 10 degrees colder. Kaya moved to top off his water, her hand steady despite the tremor starting in her core. Just as she was about to retreat, his voice, smooth and low, cut through the quiet. "What do you think?" Kaya froze, the glass pitcher suddenly feeling like a block of lead. The entire table went silent. Every eye was on her. She was sure he was speaking to the man beside him. She risked a glance. No, his dark, intelligent eyes were fixed directly on her. On her red vest and name tag. On her. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. The cruel-mouthed man, Ryota, snickered. "He's asking you, waitress. You look smart. Where should we invest our hard-earned capital?" It was a joke. A mean, dismissive joke meant to humiliate her and belittle the other man's failure. She could blush, stammer, and flee. It was what they expected. But something inside her, the part that spent sleepless nights studying for her macroeconomics midterms, bristled. She met Kenji Tanaka's gaze. It was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in it. Curiosity, perhaps. She straightened her spine. "That depends, sir," she said, her voice clearer now. "Are you looking for high-risk, high-reward growth in emerging tech sectors? Or are you looking to stabilize a portfolio with lower yield but recession-proof assets like municipal bonds and infrastructure trusts?" The silence that followed was absolute. Ryota's smirk vanished. The other men stared. Kaya's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, shocking quiet. She had just given financial advice, unsolicited, to the head of the Kuryokai. And he was still looking at her, his expression unchanged, as if he were trying to see right through her skin to the calculations ticking away in her brain. The moment stretched, thin and fragile, until Kenji Tanaka finally broke it. He leaned forward slightly, a gesture that seemed to pull all the energy in the room toward him. The faint scent of sandalwood and something metallic, like cold steel, drifted across the table. "An interesting distinction," he said, his voice retaining that same unnerving calm. "Let's choose the first option." "High risk," he paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Imagine a logistics company. It has a revolutionary distribution algorithm but is hemorrhaging cash due to poor fleet management and an overleveraged position in volatile international markets. Its stock is nearly worthless. How would you turn it around?" This was not a joke anymore. This was a test. A bizarre, impossible test conducted in the middle of a high-end restaurant, with a dozen silent men in suits as the jury. Kaya felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple. She could see her manager hovering near the kitchen door, his face pale with horror. She was supposed to be serving bread rolls, not restructuring a fictional corporation for a Yakuza boss. But retreating now felt more dangerous than answering. Her mind, trained by years of case studies and textbooks, kicked into gear. She pushed aside the fear and focused on the problem. "You wouldn't buy the stock," she began, her voice gaining confidence. "The equity is a trap. You'd buy the debt. Acquire their defaulted bonds for pennies on the dollar. That makes you the primary creditor." She took a breath, feeling the eyes of the men on her like physical weights. "With a controlling stake in the debt, you force a Chapter 11 restructuring. You wipe out the existing shareholders, including the incompetent management. Then you convert your debt to equity. You now own the company, its assets, and its algorithm for a fraction of its potential value. From there, you bring in new management to fix the fleet and renegotiate the international contracts from a position of strength. She finished, her chest tight. She had just laid out a ruthless, but perfectly legal, vulture capitalist strategy. Ryota was staring at her with open hostility now, his pride wounded. But Kenji Tanaka's expression had finally changed. A slow, subtle smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a warm smile. It was one of appreciation, like a grandmaster acknowledging a clever move from an unexpected opponent. He gave a slight nod, a gesture of dismissal. "Thank you for your consultation," he said, the words formal but carrying a new weight. Kaya simply nodded back, her throat too dry to speak, and retreated from the table on trembling legs. When she brought the bill later, the portfolio was closed. Inside, tucked under a tip that made her gasp, was a simple, black business card with nothing but a phone number embossed in silver. "You cannot be serious," Lena said, her voice a horrified whisper. She was perched on the edge of Kaya's bed, staring at the black card as if it were a live scorpion. "You're not actually thinking of calling that number. Kaya, this isn't a movie. That man was Yakuza. Like real life, cut off your pinky finger Yakuza." Kaya sat at her small desk, the card lying on her open finance textbook. The tip money, a crisp stack of $100 bills amounting to more than her entire month's rent, was sitting beside it. It felt like a down payment. "Allure." "He asked for financial advice, Lena. He didn't threaten me, he didn't have to. His whole existence is a threat. They probably own the restaurant. They probably own this whole block." Lena threw her hands up in exasperation. What could he possibly want from a 20-year-old waitress? That was the question that had been echoing in Kaya's mind for the past 24 hours. It was a joke that had turned serious. A test she had inexplicably passed. The money on her desk was proof of that. It was more than just a tip, it was a signal. A demonstration of power and possibility. It was a door creaking open to a world she had only read about in textbooks, a world of high-stakes finance, corporate takeovers, and immense wealth. And, yes, immense danger. She thought of her student loans, the constant, grinding worry about making ends meet, the dream of one day having her own firm feeling so impossibly distant. This card, this number felt like a shortcut, a terrifying, reckless, and undeniably tempting one. "I don't know what he wants," Kaya admitted, tracing the silver numerals with her finger. "But he listened. No one in my classes, not even my professors, listens to me like that. He saw something, or he sees a pawn," Lena countered, her voice softening with concern. "Someone disposable. Someone with no connections who won't be missed if things go wrong." Kaya knew she was right to be scared. Every rational instinct screamed at her to burn the card and forget the whole encounter. But her ambition, the quiet, fierce engine that drove her, whispered something else. It whispered that opportunities like this, however strange their packaging, never came twice. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the call button. It was a choice. Her life could continue as it was, safe, predictable, and hard. Or it could become something else entirely. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she pressed the button. The phone rang twice before a man with a polite, formal voice answered. "Moshi Moshi," it wasn't Kenji Tanaka. I was given this number," Kaya stammered. "My name is Kaya." There was a brief pause. "We are aware," the voice replied smoothly. "Tanaka-sama would like to schedule a meeting to discuss your proposal. A car will be waiting for you at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening." The line went dead. Kaya stared at her phone, the finality of it all settling in her stomach like a stone. She had made her choice. The car was a black sedan with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It arrived at 8 o'clock on the silent and imposing. The man who got out was not the driver. He was the polite voice from the phone, dressed in a suit as sharp as his watchful gaze. He introduced himself as Sato and held the door open for her without another word. The ride was silent, a smooth glide through the city's glittering veins, ending at a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. They didn't go through the lobby. A private elevator, accessed through a discreet service entrance, took them straight to the penthouse. The doors opened not into a residence, but a vast, minimalist office. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking panorama of the city lights spread out like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Kenji Tanaka stood in front of it, not in the suit from the restaurant, but in a simple black collared shirt and dark trousers. He looked different here, in his element. The quiet diner had been a role. This was the reality. The power in the room was palpable, a low hum of authority that had nothing to do with his physical presence and everything to do with the empire he commanded from this perch. "Thank you for coming, Kaya-san," he said, turning to face her. He gestured to a leather chair opposite his massive mahogany desk. Sato remained by the door, a silent, observant statue. "The strategy you outlined," Kenji began, getting straight to the point as she sat, "was sound. Aggressive. It showed an understanding not just of the rules, but of how to use them." He sat down, his movements economical and precise. "I have a number of legitimate business holdings. Shipping, real estate, tech investments. They are profitable, but inefficient. They are managed by men who understand my primary business, but not the subtleties of the open market. I need an outside perspective. Someone untainted by my world, who can see the numbers for what they are." He slid a thick folder across the desk. "This is the portfolio for one of my real estate ventures. I want you to analyze it. Find the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, the missed opportunities. I will pay you a consulting fee of $20,000 for your initial report." Kaya stared at the folder, then at him.
$22,000.
It was more money than she'd ever seen. "Why me?" she asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. "There are hundreds of qualified analysts in this city, because they are known," he answered simply. "Their allegiances are bought and sold. You are an unknown quantity, and you are not afraid to suggest a hostile takeover to a man's face. That shows character." The offer was real. It was a legitimate job, wrapped in the most illegitimate of circumstances. She felt a thrill of excitement, mixed with a cold spike of fear. As she accepted the folder, her fingers brushed his. A brief, unexpected warmth. When the meeting was over, Sato escorted her back to the elevator. As she waited, she glanced down the long, sterile hallway leading away from the office. 2 more men stood there, their presence a silent testament to the layers of security she had just passed through. They weren't there to protect the office. They were there to protect him. And for the first time, it occurred to her that if Kenji Tanaka needed this much protection, it was because there were people who wanted him dead. And she had just stepped directly into his world. The danger was no longer an abstract concept. It was standing 20 feet away, wearing a suit and watching her every move. News of the Waitress consultant spread through the Koryakai's inner circle like a virus. To men like Ryota, it was more than an anomaly. It was an insult. He had been publicly, if subtly, rebuked by Kenji at that dinner, and now the instrument of his humiliation was being given a formal role. He saw Kaya not as an asset, but as a symptom of Kenji's deviation from tradition, a dangerous flirtation with the outside world that weakened them all. His resentment festered, curdling into a dark resolve. He wouldn't challenge Kenji directly, not yet, but he could test the strength of this new, bizarre attachment. He could show the Oyabun how fragile his new asset truly was. The first incident was small, designed to feel random. Kaya was walking home from the library late one evening, her mind preoccupied with the real estate portfolio Kenji had given her. It was a labyrinth of shell corporations and holding companies, but she was already starting to find the patterns, the inefficiencies. As she turned onto her quiet residential street, 2 men stepped out from the shadows of an alley. They were large, menacing, and moved with a purpose that screamed this was no simple mugging. "Give us your bag," one of them growled, blocking her path. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. She clutched the strap of her messenger bag, the laptop inside holding all her initial analysis. Before she could even scream, a dark car screeched around the corner, its headlights pinning the 2 men in their glare. The doors flew open and two figures in dark suits emerged, moving with a silent, terrifying efficiency. Her would-be assailants didn't even try to fight. They dropped everything and ran, disappearing back into the darkness. The car idled for a moment, its occupants ensuring she was safe, and then it simply pulled away, melting back into the city traffic as if it had never been there. Kaya stood trembling on the sidewalk, her heart hammering. It wasn't a coincidence. They had been watching her. She didn't call the police. Who would she tell? What would she say? Instead, she called the number on the black card. Sato answered on the first ring. She explained what happened, her voice shaky. There was a pause on the other end. "Please remain in your apartment," Sato said, his tone clipped and serious. "A car will be with you shortly to bring you to a secure location." Tanaka-sama has been informed. The protective bubble she had vaguely sensed had now become tangible. It had saved her tonight. But the incident left a chilling realization in its wake. The bubble was necessary because there was a very real threat on the outside. And Ryota, seething in the shadows, was just getting started. He had underestimated Kenji's protective measures, but all he had learned was that he needed to be bolder. The next time, there would be no car waiting to intervene. For a week, an unnerving quiet settled over Kaya's life. A new routine was established with swift, impersonal efficiency. A black car, driven by a silent man named Ito, picked her up every morning and took her to a discreet office sweet Kenji had secured for her. She was never alone. The protection was suffocating, a constant reminder of the invisible war she had stumbled into. She delivered her initial report to Kenji, who received it with a quiet nod of approval, his praise measured but genuine. For a brief moment, she could almost pretend this was a normal, albeit eccentric, consulting gig. But Ryota was patient. He watched the new patterns, identified the seams in her security. He knew a direct assault was foolish. Deception was required. The opportunity came in the form of Lena. Ryota's men learned about Kaya's closest friend, her predictable schedule, her trusting nature. The plan was simple and cruel. Kaya received a frantic call from Lena's phone. The voice on the other end was her friend, crying and panicked. "Kaya, oh God, I was in an accident. A cab hit me. My leg is broken. They're taking me to St. Jude's Hospital. Can you please come?" The raw fear in Lena's voice bypassed all of Kaya's caution. She didn't think to call Sato. She didn't think about the protocol. She only thought of her friend. "I'm on my way," she promised, grabbing her coat. She told Ito she had a personal emergency and needed to go to St. Jude's immediately. The driver, trained for external threats, not internal deceptions, saw the genuine panic on her face and complied, relaying the change of destination to his superiors. It was the fatal mistake. St. Jude's was on the other side of town. As they navigated the heavy downtown traffic, a delivery van suddenly swerved in front of them, forcing Ito to slam on the brakes. Simultaneously, a heavy-duty truck boxed them in from behind. Doors flew open. It wasn't a random accident. It was a coordinated trap. Before Ito could even reach for his weapon, his window shattered inward. Men in black masks swarmed the car. Kaya screamed as her door was wrenched open. A hand clamped over her mouth, another arm cinching around her waist, lifting her from the seat with brutal strength. She fought, kicking and struggling, but she was overpowered in seconds. A cloth was pressed over her face, the sweet, cloying smell of chloroform filling her lungs. The world tilted, the sounds of the city fading into a muffled roar. Her last conscious thought was of Kenji's calm, steady eyes, and the terrifying certainty that she had just walked straight into the trap he had tried so hard to protect her from. The bubble had popped. When Kenji received the news, the cold control he perpetually maintained fractured. For a single, terrifying moment, the mask of the calculating businessman fell away, revealing the apex predator beneath. The report from Sato was clipped. Ito was neutralized, Kaya was gone, and the attack bore all the hallmarks of a professional, internal hit. There was only one person with the motive and the means, Ryota. Every resource of the Kuryukai was mobilized, not with quiet discretion, but with the force of a tidal wave. Kenji didn't care about secrecy anymore. He wanted her back. His network flooded the city, and within an hour, they had a location, a derelict shipping warehouse on the industrial waterfront, a property owned by one of Ryota's shell corporations. Kenji arrived not with an army, but with a small, elite team, including Sato. He walked into the cavernous, dimly lit space alone, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Ryota was waiting in the center, flanked by a handful of his most loyal men. Kaya was there, tied to a chair, a gag over her mouth, but conscious and blessedly unharmed. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Kenji's. "This was foolish, Ryota," Kenji said, his voice dangerously soft. "You have broken every code. You have brought an outsider into our affairs." Ryota laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I broke the code? You brought a stray into our house and gave her a seat at the table. You have grown soft, Tanaka-sama. This girl is your weakness." "I am simply proving it," he gestured to Kaya with a gun. "Now, you will cede control of the waterfront territories to my authority. And she will serve as collateral until the transition is complete." Kenji's face was a blank mask, but his eyes were burning. He took a slow step forward. "The territories are not yours to take. And she is not collateral." He continued to walk, his pace unhurried, closing the distance between them. "You are right about one thing. I have grown soft. I allowed a snake like you to remain in my garden for far too long, hoping you would learn your place." Ryota tensed, raising the gun to point it directly at Kaya's head. "Stop. Another step and she dies." Kenji stopped. He looked at Kaya, a silent promise passing between them. Then he looked back at Ryota. "You think this is your only problem?" he asked. In that split second of confusion, the vast warehouse doors at the far end of the building slammed open. Floodlights ignited, blinding Ryota's men. Before they could react, dozens of Kenji's soldiers swarmed in from all sides, a silent, disciplined force. The negotiation was a lie. The real plan was already in motion. As chaos erupted, Kenji moved. He didn't run. He flowed through the ensuing pandemonium with lethal grace, his focus entirely on Kaya. A single gunshot rang out, not from the fight, but from Kenji's own hand, a precise shot that shattered Ryota's wrist, sending his weapon clattering to the concrete floor. Before Ryota could even scream, Sato was on him. Kenji reached Kaya, his hands quickly undoing the ropes that bound her. He pulled the gag from her mouth, his expression a mixture of fury and profound relief. The moment the ropes fell away, Kaya's strength gave out. She slumped forward, and Kenji caught her, pulling her into a protective embrace. His arms wrapped around her, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, holding her securely against his chest. The sounds of the brief, brutal fight faded into the background, muffled and distant. All she could hear was the frantic beat of her own heart and the steady, reassuring thrum of his. He was warm, solid, and real. He smelled of sandalwood and the cold, sharp scent of ozone from the gunshot. She trembled against him, the adrenaline and terror of the past few hours crashing over her in a wave of delayed shock. He didn't say anything at first, just held her, letting his presence be a shield against the violence that had just unfolded around them. His usual iron control was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded protectiveness she had never seen. "Are you hurt?" he finally murmured, his voice low and rough against her hair. She shook her head, unable to speak, and burrowed deeper into his hold. He held her tighter in response. After a long moment, he gently pulled back, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. His dark eyes searched hers, filled with an intensity that took her breath away. It wasn't the gaze of a client or a boss. It was something deeper, something fiercely personal. "This is my fault," he said, his voice laced with self-recrimination. "I brought you into this world. I put you in this danger. I will not let it happen again." "It wasn't your fault," she whispered, finding her voice. "It was my choice to call. A choice I offered," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "A choice I will now honor." Properly, Sato approached them, his expression grim. Ryota and his men are secured. Tanaka-sama. What are your orders? Kenji didn't look away from Kaya. Excommunication, he said, the single word carrying the weight of a death sentence in their world. Ensure he understands the full consequences of his actions. Then remove him from my sight. Sato bowed and retreated. The finality of the order was chilling, a stark reminder of the man holding her. He was a protector, but he was also a king ruling a brutal kingdom. Kenji took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. It felt like a promise. I'm taking you home, he said. But as he led her out of the warehouse, past the subdued chaos and into the cool night air, she knew that her old apartment, her old life, was no longer home. Home was now a far more complicated and far more dangerous concept. It was wherever he was. The vow he had made was not just about her safety, it was a fundamental shift in their relationship, binding her to him in a way no contract ever could. The word home turned out to be his penthouse. Not the sterile office where they had first met, but his private residence on the floor above it, a place of quiet elegance and floor-to-ceiling windows that made it feel as though they were living in the sky. Her apartment was cleared out by his men the next day. Her belongings moved with quiet efficiency. There was no discussion. It was simply a fact. Her safety was paramount, and her old life was too vulnerable. The first few days were a blur of disorientation. Kaya lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by breathtaking views and silent, watchful guards. She had a new office, connected to his, where she could continue her work on his portfolios. The work was her only anchor to normalcy, a set of problems she could solve with logic and numbers in a world that now operated on a completely different set of rules. Kenji gave her space, but he was a constant presence. He would bring her tea in the evenings, sitting in silence as she worked, his company a comforting weight. They started eating their meals together, not in a formal dining room, but in the kitchen. The conversation stilted at first, then gradually deepening. She learned about his childhood, the immense pressure of inheriting his father's title, his dream of legitimizing the Kuryakai's assets so that the next generation would not have to live in the shadows. He wanted to build something that would last, something clean. She, in turn, told him about her ambitions, the fire in her that drove her to be the best, to build something of her own. He listened with that same focused intensity he'd had in the restaurant, his respect for her mind a tangible thing. The romance between them grew not in grand declarations, but in small, quiet moments. It was in the way he would place a hand on the small of her back as they walked through a room, a subtle gesture of possession and protection. It was in the way she would find a rare, out-of-print economics book she'd once mentioned sitting on her desk. One night, she was working late, wrestling with a particularly complex merger proposal. He came to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders, his presence a warm, calming influence. You are relentless, he said, his voice a low murmur near her ear. I know, she replied, leaning her head back against his chest. It's the only way I know how to be. He was silent for a moment. Ryota saw you as a weakness, he said, his voice tight with the memory of his failure to protect her. He was a fool. You are the strongest part of this entire organization. You are its future. He bent down, his lips brushing her temple in a gesture of profound tenderness that was more intimate than any passionate kiss. In that moment, the power dynamic that had defined their relationship evaporated completely. He was not her employer or her protector. She was not his consultant or his ward. They were partners, two ambitious souls from wildly different worlds who had found in each other a missing piece. She was the architect of his legitimate future, and he was the fortress that allowed her to build it safely. A year later, the city skyline glittered outside the panoramic windows, the view as familiar to Kaya now as the back of her own hand. She stood before the glass, not in a waitress uniform, but in a sharp, elegant business dress, a tablet in her hand displaying the final quarterly projections for Tanaka Holdings International. The name was her idea. It was clean, powerful, and devoid of any link to the Kuryakai's shadowy past. In 1 year, under her guidance, Kenji had successfully divested from his most volatile underworld enterprises, reinvesting the capital into a sprawling, legitimate empire of tech, logistics, and sustainable real estate. She had done it. She had taken the raw power of his organization and reshaped it into a formidable corporate entity. She heard him enter the room, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. He came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar comfort. He no longer wore the constant armor of the Oyabun around her. In the privacy of their home, he was just Kenji. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest and resting his chin on her shoulder. "The board approved the Singapore acquisition," she said, her voice calm and confident. "Profits are up 30% since last year." "I know," he murmured, his lips against her skin. "I have the best analyst in the world." He wasn't looking at the city or the tablet, but at her. The love in his eyes was a quiet, steady flame that had long ago burned away the shadows of their violent beginning. He turned her around to face him, his hands cupping her face. "A year ago, I asked a waitress a question as a joke," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "And she answered by giving me a new world." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Kaya's breath caught in her throat. He didn't kneel. It wasn't his style. He simply opened the box, revealing a ring. It wasn't a massive, ostentatious diamond. It was an elegant platinum band, with a single, perfect sapphire the color of a midnight sky set in the center, flanked by two smaller, brilliant-cut diamonds. It was a reflection of her, sophisticated, strong, and quietly dazzling. "This is not an obligation," he said, his gaze intense and sincere, echoing the choice he had given her so long ago. "It is a promise of protection, a promise of partnership, a promise that my world, my future, and my life are yours, if you will have them." Tears welled in Kaya's eyes, not of fear or uncertainty, but of a profound, unshakable joy. She had walked into his world as an underestimated outsider, a pawn in a dangerous game. Now, she stood at its center, not as a prize or a protected asset, but as its queen. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My answer is yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It felt not like a shackle, but like the final, perfect piece of a puzzle she never knew she was solving. He was her fortress, and she was his foundation. And together, from their perch high above the world, they would build their empire.